Today we have the honor of being joined by Jason Sullivent. Jason has one of the most powerful stories you will ever hear. When he was 17, he made a decision where he thought he would spend the rest of his life in prison after this decision. But what he ended up learning is when you put your hope in Christ, then you can always have hope in life. This is an episode that you will not want to miss. I hope you guys enjoy this as much as I have. Welcome to the Rise Above podcast. I'm your host, Will Lambley, and today we have the special honor of being joined by one of my good friends, Jason Sullivent. He has one of the most powerful stories that I've ever heard, and it's really encouraged me as I've gone through many different situations in my life. And first off, thank you for joining us today, Jason.
Well, thanks for having me, Will.
Yes, sir. How you been doing?
So doing good. Chasing kids all over the place.
Yeah.
Sports. So.
And you have two kids, right?
I've got a 12-year-old daughter and an 8-year-old son.
Okay, so yeah, probably the busiest time of your life right now. Seems like.
Yes, sir.
Yes. And then you actually grew up in the same area that my parents grew up and you grew up in Tulsa, right?
Yeah, so I grew up on the east side of Tulsa, went to Tulsa East Central. Your mom and my sister were actually really good friends throughout school. Yeah. And so it's been really neat to be able to reconnect with your family and become friends. And your mom and dad have been real supportive of me. And it's just been, it's been a blessing.
Yeah, I think it's always fun when your sister comes to town hearing all the stories of like stuff you guys used to do, or she'll like tell stories of things my dad used to do that I don't know about. So it's always funny hearing that.
Yeah, I don't hear too many of those from her, but I hear them from your mom. I hear some from your mom, and she makes my sister out to be a little bit tougher than I think she actually is. Yeah. But no, it's pretty cool. Okay. The full circle that's happened. So.
And what was it like growing up with your family as you were a kid? I know you had a sister, and then what was it like with your parents too?
So I grew up in, really for a pretty good home. My mom and dad were married. They were hardworking, couple that tried to do everything they could to make sure my sister and I had all that we needed. And we didn't always have everything that we wanted, but we didn't go without, for sure. And so my dad was, he was a pretty hard case. He was a pretty authoritarian kind of guy, do things my way. And I was a hardhead, rebellious kid. And so we butted heads quite a bit growing up.
Okay. And then was there anything you were involved in as a kid? I know you said you used to always hang out with your buddies like in the neighborhood and stuff, but like were you involved in any sports? Or?
So I grew up, baseball was my favorite. There were other sports that I was interested in, but when I was probably, 5 or 6 years old, I had the doctors found out that I had a heart murmur, basically, I guess, is what it was. And so baseball was the only thing that they would really release me to play. And so I kind of took to that and set forth on trying to be the best that I could be, and baseball was a big part of my life growing up. That's all I ever wanted to do. It's all I can ever remember wanting to do. And so, and as I got older, I got into junior high. I was able to play football, so I played football a couple years, but I was a little bit behind some of the guys. And by that point too, I had started down a little bit different path and started, heading in the wrong direction. So those types of things that, interest me were kind of fading quickly.
Okay. So like sports weren't as important to you as you started getting involved in other things?
Yeah. So, I got into junior high, and basically what happened was my dad yanked me off my 7th grade baseball team because I wasn't making good grades. And instead of using that as an opportunity to refocus, get my grades up and get back playing sports, I rebelled, and I just decided to go the other direction, and I got worse in school instead of better, actually. And so the 8th grade I flunked out, and didn't play that year either. Got held back, had to repeat the 8th grade. And so, I just I started using it as an excuse to be mad and angry and blame everybody for everything that was going on, you know.
Okay. And in that time, was there anyone that was around you that was going to church? Or I know you said you had like a grandparent that wasn't he a pastor or?
So my grandfather was a pastor, so I was around church growing up quite a bit, and he was pretty influential in my life. You know, my grandparents were very God-fearing people, and you know, very devout. And my grandfather, you know, before he retired, you know, spent a lot of time in Mexico building churches and stuff like that. And so you're doing missions. And so, you know, I had that in my life. Yes.
Okay. Were you, I know for me growing up, kind of before I lost my sight, I was one of those kids, like, I would be at church, but it wasn't really my decision. So if you were ever at church, was it kind of like one of those things where someone else's decision?
A lot of time, more times than not. I mean, yeah. I mean, and, you know, unless I wanted to go hang out with my grandparents, stay the night, I knew that Sunday morning we were going to church. There was no ifs, ands, buts about it. You know,
yeah, you don't argue with your grandparents.
No, I mean, so if I wanted to go over there and do that, I knew that we were going to go to church, and I enjoyed going from time to time. It wasn't an every Sunday thing for me or my family. My grandparents were not churchgoers at all. So, but we had people from their church that would pick us up. You know, they would come drive over and pick us up, take us to church once in a while, and then we were in and out some of our friends' churches. You know, their parents would invite us, and we would do that once in a while, but we were not every Sunday church people at all.
Okay. Now I know you talked about like when you started making some choices, you started to get less interested in sports. What were some of those choices, and kind of like, can you talk about like what that led to?
So, really, what happened was when I got held back in the 8th grade and I started going to an alternative school downtown Tulsa, and so I had a lot of free time in between. We would go 4 hours a day to that school, and then we would ride the city bus back and finish out in 3 hours at our junior high that we were attending at that time, and so there was a lot of free time, and I started running around. Not really, I don't even know if I would say running around, but I was around guys and kids that were already experimenting with drugs and alcohol, and so you know, I got drunk for the first time that year, and that that made a impact on my life, because I grew up in a household where Saturday OU football games were pretty big. You know, my uncles would come over, or we would go over to their house, and my dad and them would sit around and have some beers and watch football. And I kind of looked up to that. You know, I don't know, thought about, man, when I get older, that's something that I want to be able to do, hang out with my friends and family, have some beers and watch football, you know. And so the first time I got drunk, I mean, I don't know if you've heard it a lot, but you hear it a lot. And alcohol, drugs, those types of things, they change the way you feel. And sometimes, and for me, it was this case, it kind of made me feel more, I guess, it made me feel better about myself, really, is what it boils down to. It just seemed like everything in the world okay, right? Like there was, I didn't have to worry about anything that was going on, you know, being mad at my dad or my dad being mad at me, not being able to do the things that I wanted to do. And so it had a pretty big impact on my life. And my freshman year in high school, got to high school, and the party was on from there. You know, by the time I finished up the 9th grade, I was pretty much addicted to alcohol. And, you know, I didn't drink every day, but it was something that I thought about or I tried to do every day, you know. And it pretty much had just, you know, it was running my life. Like my goal was to figure out where I could party next and when I could get drunk the next time.
Would you say in that time that was kind of just where you found your confidence and found your hope?
What's that?
Would you say during that time, like alcohol and other resources is kind of like where you were looking to for your confidence and hope?
Yeah, I mean, it was just it kind of took away the worries, right? Like, you know, I was I was not living the life that I thought I would be living at that point, right? I figured, freshman in high school, I mean, really my goal was to be, playing baseball, in high school. And so I wasn't. And because I was chasing something, another dream, really, at this point. I was chasing something else. And I don't even say that it was my dream, but I was chasing something different. And so, it became the one thing in my life that was, really, it was number one at that point.
Okay. And then after your freshman year, were you on the same path of just chasing the same things? Yeah.
So that summer, things progressed to get worse. I get worse. Things with my dad were not real good at all, and fortunately, he spent a lot of time working out of town, so he was gone a lot. So whenever he was not home, then I basically just run around wild and did whatever I wanted to do for the most part. I did, however, my start of my sophomore year, I thought, man, I'm going to start doing better in school. I want to get my grades up because I'm going to try to go back to playing ball. I'm going to try to go back out and walk on, and And I was actually doing a little bit better in my classwork. However, I was still drinking, and I can remember going to a party with a friend of mine and saying, I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to drink. I'm just going to go and hang out. We'll hang out. And that was when, that was the first time I realized, looking back, that at that point I really didn't have any control over it. I couldn't not drink. No matter what I could try if I wanted to, but if I was around it, I was going to do it. Okay. And, once I started, I didn't stop.
So it's one of those things where if you were around it, then even if you came in there thinking like, I'm not going to do it, it was just kind of took over everything you did.
Sure.
In a sense.
Yeah. My friends, I had friends that had noticed that it was becoming a little bit more than just partying on the weekends, that it was becoming a problem. But I didn't know what to do about it. I didn't know. Okay.
And then did that lead to other things happening, like not going to school, or I know you said you got more dedicated your sophomore year, but did you start like losing dedication too?
Well, yeah. I was still skipping school and going out and getting drunk with friends from time to time. Like I said, I was doing better in most of my classwork for the most part, but I was still doing some of the same things, right? So some friends of mine and I decided that we were going to skip school and have a party, and ended up having it at my house. And there was probably about 7 or 8 of us there for the most part of the day. We went and got some beer and spent all day drinking and just having a good time doing things that guys do, And so about, 2 o'clock, 2:30, we needed some more, and so we were going to load up and go get some alcohol. And we got some more alcohol, and about 2:45, about the time school was letting out, a friend of mine and I, we got into an argument. And as sad as it is, the argument was over popsicle. It was something that it was a specific type of popsicle that my mom, I was a kid, and so I was like, man, my mom's going to find out. She's going to know something's going on. And so we got into an argument. I told him to leave. He told me I wasn't big enough to make him leave. And so I pulled a .22 rifle on him. I loaded it and ended up shooting and killing him. And, went to jail. They booked me in, charged me as an adult, charged me with first-degree murder. And a year later, found me guilty of first-degree murder, and I was sentenced to life in prison in Oklahoma Department of Corrections.
Now, when you officially got sentenced to life in prison, at that point, what were some feelings that were going through your head?
Man, it's been so long ago.
Yeah.
That was like 1987, man. So that's, I was 16 years old. It's been a long time. My main thought was really about me. I was worried about my own butt. Whether or not I would. My thought as a kid, you don't know the system. You don't know how it works. I mean, I was thinking, man, I'm never getting out. I'm really going to spend the rest of my life in prison. You know, I'm 16 years old and I'm going to die in there. And so, you know, that's what I worried about, you know, was whether or not I would be found guilty or be found innocent and get to go home. And that's what I spent the next year fighting that case. So.
Yeah, and then I think when a lot of people think of prison, they think of, like, the first thing you think of is movies where people can get whatever they want and do whatever they want. Like, you almost have to, like, always be looking behind your shoulder. Would you say it's about the same as that?
So, I mean, it's similar. So here's the thing, you have to realize that when they show movies on TV, they're like cramming everything that happens all in one scene or, a couple scenes or whatever. But yeah, I mean, it is like that. I mean, there were times where it got pretty sketchy and you had to pay attention to what was going on around you pretty much all the time. It's a completely different lifestyle, wasn't something that I was really prepared for, to tell you the truth, and so it was an eye-opener. I had to grow up quick and learn how they lived in there really fast. And it was an eye opener for sure.
Was there some people in the prison that really helped you out since you were kind of the young kid in there?
Yeah, so I was pretty fortunate. I had some guys that had been in quite a while that pulled me up and basically taught me the do's and don'ts. Because when you go in as a kid, you don't really, especially growing up in a family that wasn't familiar with that type of life, you don't know really what to look for or what to expect in there. And so I had some guys that pulled me. They were like big brothers to me, and taught me how to live in there. And now they didn't take up for me by any means. I mean, if something were to happen, I was still going to have to fight my own fight. Yeah. But I mean, they looked out for me.
I've actually heard a quote from someone who spent 15 years in prison. He said that, like, prison, like life, like, you're not going to win all your fights, but you have to fight all your fights.
Yeah,
you can't back away from challenges.
For sure, yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the biggest thing. I mean, you don't want to show any weakness, for sure.
I'm sure they can sense that real quick.
I mean, the thing is, just be willing to fight. Yeah. Just be willing to stand up for yourself. Be willing to take up for yourself and make sure that people aren't going to run you over. Respect. A lot of people look at things that happen in prison as far as fights, stabbings, killings, and there's a lot of it just boils down to respect. You treat somebody badly, bad things happen. And so you really learn to talk to people and treat people in a way that you want to be treated for the most part, because you don't want somebody talking sideways to you, especially in a group of people, because then you're put in a situation, well, what do I do? I mean, you pretty much have to do something. There is not really a choice.
Okay. And then what did a normal day like? What's kind of like a few things you would do in a normal day in prison?
It depends. So when I first went in, I went to Oklahoma State Reformatory, which is in Granite, Oklahoma, and they had a GED program. And so anybody under the age of 18 at that time had to go. They basically had to go through this program. So I went. The first 3.5 years I went to school. That was most of my day. I would go in, take classes. They actually had a high school accredited school there, and so you could get regular high school credits. But I ended up getting my GED. Took some college while I was there. Got my associate's degree. And then once school let out, it was kind of a free yard. We played basketball, lifted weights. I mean,
I'm sure those are some pretty crazy games.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's not like playing in high school, that's for sure.
Yeah, I'm sure there's no free layups back there.
No.
Or I'm sure if you shove someone that one of the bigger guys, I'm sure he really remembered it.
Right. Well, it was like I'll never forget. So it was like my second day there, and I saw the guys out there playing basketball and a bunch of old guys. I was 17 at the time, and I thought, man, I'm gonna go show these old dudes how to play. Man, I got beat to death.
Yeah, I'm sure you never forgot that game. And then I'm sure that whenever you started taking classes there, I'm sure, were you just more grateful to just have a chance to still be taking classes, or were you still like, I don't want to be doing this?
No, I was. I mean, I was like, because I thought my life was over at that point, you know. And then once you get in and you start learning things about the system, you know, I found out that just because I had a life sentence didn't mean that I was never going to get out. Now, there was that possibility. They could have kept me forever, but after 15 years, I had the chance of parole. So, you know, it was a good opportunity that they had, and I was able to do the schooling that I got. And I mean, it helped. I mean, it made a big difference in my life for whenever I did get out. I didn't see it at that point in time, you know. I mean, I was still a kid, so there were times where I didn't want to go. But yeah, I mean, I took the opportunity and ran with it.
And was there a time where in prison you realized that, man, I can still have hope in life? Is there like a defining moment?
There was, but it was after some time where I didn't have any of that either.
Yeah.
So, you know, it wasn't long that although I was in prison, hadn't used, you know, or drank in a while, there were still things inside of me, especially what I'd just gone through and what I just did, that were bothering me. And so I started using drugs. I started drinking again. I spent, you know, probably the next 10 years struggling with alcohol and drug abuse in prison.
Oh, this is 10 years after you've been in prison?
Yeah. And so, you know, I was trying to basically just dull myself to the fact that, you know, where I was at and forget about those surroundings. And I had pretty much resigned to the fact that I was going to spend the rest of my life in there. So, you know, fast forward to 1997, somewhere in there, I was at another facility. At this time, I had transferred and had gone to Lexington and then to another place called Joseph Hart. And I was there, and they had a pastor that was having a tent revival out on the main yard. And me and some friends were coming back after playing softball. And something just drew me to the outside of that tent. Man, I was standing out there just listening to him preach. And it was about the time that he was finishing up. And only thing I remember is standing there and him saying, if you want something different in your life, come down here. I've got it. I can show you how to get it. And next thing I know, I was down there with my hands raised, praising Almighty God, you know, and I can't tell you, there was definitely a difference in the way I felt inside, you know, and right then and there, my life was changed.
That's awesome. I love that, and you can probably testify to this, but so many times in life, we want our situation to just change just like that, but really the biggest change is up to us, and if we're going to change our heart to go to Christ. What are some things you saw that started to change after that moment? Well,
first of all, I mean, you know, it's really weird, and I know this doesn't happen for everybody, but the desire to use was gone. Desire to get high or drink was gone.
Use, you mean like get high or drink? Okay.
I mean, so I didn't have that desire any longer. I wanted to, you know, my friends would get tired of me coming over to their room because I would always try to invite them to church or do, you know, they. I wanted to share what I had. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm sure after that you're probably like, man, I'm fired. I got something like that can like change you guys too.
The anger, there was always like this pent up anger that I had that was gone. You know, I didn't even know what I was mad at most of the time. I just was like, just always tense, you know, and felt like I was angry at something or somebody, but never knew really what. That was gone. And I quit worrying about whether or not I was going to get out of prison. I tell people this, and I don't know really, I think it was just more of a feeling than God just really told me. But I tell people all the time that, you know, the one thing, God never promised me that he would get me out of prison just because I gave my life to him, just because I decided to serve him. He didn't promise me that he would pull me out of that situation. But the one thing he did promise me was joy and peace and hope in the middle of it. And so, that made a big change in my life. I quit worrying about whether I got out of prison and started just, trying to be the guy that God wanted me to be in the first place.
It reminds me of a verse that you've actually shared with me before. I shared this the other night. Something I realized about this verse. This verse is Romans 12, verse 12. It says, "Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, and faithful in prayer." And joy and patience are both feelings, but being faithful in prayer, that's an action.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're faithful in prayer, then you can find joy. Then you can find patience. As you talked about, you're able to find joy. And you're able to stop worrying because you found patience because you're faithful. And I love that, and it reminds me exactly of what you're talking about. And while you were in prison, was there some people that, whether they were writing to you or people in there that started to help you and help that hope you found in Christ?
So, the one thing that I can say, I can go back to all the way to that day, and walking into the Tulsa County Jail. And even then, although I didn't really know this, I had this peace over me, like everything was going to be okay. I didn't know what that meant, and looking back, I can still feel that. I can remember walking across. They had this little bridge that they take you up, and then they go across the little bridge, and it's downtown. And I can remember, I'm handcuffed, and the officer's walking with me, and I just had this feeling like everything was going to be all right.
So this is from the moment you went in?
Yeah.
Okay.
But while I was in, it seemed like God always placed Christian men in my life. And I'm talking about guys that were in prison. And some of them had been in for quite a while and had done a lot of time, and some of them for a lot of bad things, and so it was like he was giving me a roadmap, showing me what being a Christian looked like, that just because I was in prison, just because I did some bad things, there was still a way to live. There were always people from my grandparents' church, family, friends that wrote. And I think I know where you're going with. One of the neatest stories is my sister went to play college softball at Tulsa University, and her junior year, this girl came to play shortstop there, and her and my sister became friends. Well, her family and my family would talk during games and stuff, and my mom's never really been shy about sharing what happened to me and sharing my story, and they were a good Christian family. And so Mandy is her name. Mandy's mom started writing to me just to be an encouragement, and her and I created a friendship, and we wrote to each other off and on up until the day I got out, pretty much. And so, I had a lot of people that were just always, would send little notes or, drop a line every now and then just to encourage me to keep going,
I like how, at every point, you can look back, even, when you're at your lowest, you can see, how God was placing people in your life. And I'm sure even today. And can you talk a little bit about, the moment, you knew you were going to get out, and kind of what led up to that?
Well, so, when I got sentenced and locked up, laws were a little bit different. If you got a life sentence, you were eligible for parole after 15 years. And so that didn't mean you were getting out, it just mean you were eligible to go see the parole board. And so that would have been, my first time up was 2002, and I was denied. And so there had been some changing going on in Oklahoma politics, some way of thinking. They had a new governor, and some friends, talked me into writing. And I wasn't supposed to go up for another 3 years to see the parole board. So some friends encouraged me to write to the parole board and ask them to bring me up early. And so I did, and they did. So a year later, I went up for parole. Was recommended for parole, and at that time they had started a new phase where once you were recommended, especially for guys that had been in for violent offenses for quite a while, you had to go through basically a step-down program. So I had to go to a minimum security prison for 4 months, and then from there I would go to a halfway house or work release and spend 4 months there before the governor even thought about signing my parole. So, about a year process, once it's all done, said and done, a year-long process to find out whether or not, and then, the chance is the governor doesn't sign it, he denies my parole, and then I go back and start all over again. And so that 4 months ended up turning to 4 years. I spent 4 years at the community center waiting for to hear something, whether or not I was going to get out. It's really, without going into too much detail, because I could be here all day, because God's hand, I really believe, was in this whole thing the whole time. But basically, some things happened to where it looked like they were getting tired of holding me there, some of the staff, and they did not like me being there because of my crime and the amount of time I was doing. And it kind of forced the hand on some people to make a decision, I believe. And I met some people that may or may not have had some influence in the process of them basically taking all my privileges away that I had at that point, and they were trying to send me back behind the fence. So about 6 months after all that happened, it was Christmas Eve. I was working on my job. We were doing some rebuilding of an old facility, and I was working as an electrician. And so I was there putting in wiring and putting in a box and stuff. And so anyway, it was just an ordinary day. It was Christmas Eve. Everything was closed down. I mean, I could have not worked if I didn't want to, but I chose to. And next thing I know, officer come and told me, he's like, hey, you need to come with me. You can pack your stuff. This governor signed your parole. You're going home today.
Wow.
And so I was like, first thing, I'm like, stop playing, man. Don't play with me, But yeah, I was speechless. I didn't know what to say. I've been waiting all this time, and then here it is. It just caught me off guard. I didn't have a chance to plan for it or prepare for it, and it was pretty wild.
I didn't realize that you didn't even know it was coming that day.
No.
So you're probably beyond grateful.
Oh yeah.
And I'm sure just from that moment, even now, ever since being out, I'm sure you're just being around you, your gratefulness for life, I'm sure, just helped you so much. And there's a quote that I've loved to use recently, which says, "Gratitude elevates your attitude to somewhere you never knew it could go." And what were some things that maybe you didn't have, but before you went to prison that you got when you got out of prison, where it's like a cell phone or whatever?
Well, so yeah, I mean, I got a cell phone, but so here was the cool thing about being at the community center and being there so long. Really, when I look back was probably a blessing, because I worked as the maintenance clerk for quite a while, and so I got the opportunity to drive around Oklahoma City and go pick up parts and supplies and be out in public and get familiar with what things were. Because I mean, that was a pretty big time in the whole phone thing, right? Like when I got out was when iPhone, I think the second one was coming out. So there, things were changing pretty fast for everybody, not just for me at that point.
Yeah, you got right in time.
Yeah, and so I got the opportunity while I was there to learn some computer skills, and just set myself up, because up until that point I really had no access to a computer, or hadn't used a computer very much. When I first got locked up, it was the old DOS system, I mean, everything, there wasn't even the small disk, it was the big floppy disk, I mean, so.
Okay. For the phone or for the?
No, for the computer.
Okay.
Yeah. So, well, in the phone, they did have cell phones, but they were the big boxes that you carried around.
Here's, I was thinking, that's way before my day.
Yeah. And so, I mean, there was a lot of difference but I got an opportunity to get caught up, basically, while I was there. I mean, I got caught up, and it wasn't too shocking. The hardest thing, really, I'll tell you, and I've gotten an opportunity to go back into prison and see guys and see some of my friends and share my experience with them, and try to encourage them to keep going since I've been out. And probably the biggest thing that really hit me was the loneliness, right? When you're around your closest friends 24/7. I mean, we'd get up and go eat together. We played sports together. We visited our families in the visiting room together. We ate together. I mean, we did pretty much everything as a family, pretty much, And you get out, and everybody, all your friends, all your family that you had before have gone on and lived their lives, and they have their own lives now. And so, you're trying to figure it out on your own. And not that I had to do it all by myself, because my family were pretty supportive, and they helped me out quite a bit when I first got out. But, I couldn't be around them all the time, So when I had that time to myself, it was pretty lonely. And I can see why a lot of guys struggled when they get out and end up going back, because they don't, most of them probably don't have Jesus in their life, for one, and which I lean pretty heavily on, or a very good support system, and I did. And so, and the main thing too is just perseverance, being able to push through and being able to decide, this is what I want, I don't want that. And so you just have to figure out a way to overcome.
A verse that came to mind when you talked about getting out of prison, how you felt lonely at first, and how it's what a lot of people deal with, just that loneliness, is Galatians 6 verse 9, which says, "Don't grow weary of doing good, because at the proper time you'll reap a harvest when you do not give up." And because I'm sure there's been people in prison that have been on a good path, and right when they get out, like, they get lonely, and they just need, honestly, they just need that support. And who are some people that really supported you when you got out of prison, and even today, some ways that you've been able to see God's been able to use those people in your life now to help you be where you're at?
Well, of course, the first people are my family. My family never wavered in support one bit. They tried to help me with my trial expenses. They came to visit. They were there when I got out. My sister, who at the time when I went to jail was like 5th or 6th grade, when I get out, she's a grown adult and has 2 kids that she's adopted, So I stayed with her for the first, month or so, and then she helped me get an apartment. So my family was my biggest support system. But back to the story about people that supported me while I was in, the girl that my sister played softball with, her mom and I becoming good friends. That was a big deal, and would end up being a big deal in my life after I got out, because I ended up meeting Mandy, and we ended up getting married, and so her family has been very supportive. Her mom and dad took me in and treated me like family from day one, and so that was another God thing. I really believe that Him putting some people in my life to just help me stay on track.
How many years after you got out did you guys end up getting married?
So I met Mandy 5 or 6 months after I got out, and when I met her, I had been on my sister about meeting the Sklar's, and because they had, I wanted to meet Debbie and the family, and find out who they were, and find out more about it, because they had been a big part of my life, life.
You
in the last
just knew them
few years.
through notes and stuff.
Yeah, and so I wanted to meet them, and Mandy was the only one that could make it. And so we went out to dinner, and her and I just never quit hanging out, And so it was, so I proposed to her. That was in May or June. I proposed to her in December, and we were married in May of 2010.
Oh, that's awesome. It's crazy how God has handled all that back from years past to when Debbie started writing to you.
Yeah.
And then now you and Mandy have 2 kids. Jaden is, I know, in 6th grade, then Jet's in 2nd grade.
Yeah.
And it's just been cool to see how God's been able to work through all this, and how He's been able to use you to not just help you, but help so many people that come across you on the daily. As what's your official title, Robertson Tire now?
I'm assistant manager.
Assistant manager, okay, nice. And then for people listening to this, there might be some people that are just feel stuck in the road, like they can't rise above. What would you tell them are some of the biggest things that have helped you rise above, and you would encourage them with?
So probably for me, my biggest thing was staying focused on God, staying focused on Christ. I didn't know how to be a Christian when I first got saved. I knew what it looked like from the outside. I saw my grandparents, and I'd been in church, but I didn't know how that translated into me doing that. And so one of the things that, whenever that first happened, and then probably even more so as time went by, there were times where I just spent time every day just talking to God. It wasn't like I was doing any special type of prayer. I literally would have serious conversations. I would go on a walk around the ball field or whatever and just talk to God. And so that's probably the main thing that helped me. And so, especially during the time while I was waiting on parole, because there were some times, man, where I was kind of really, I was ready to give up, and I had those doubts that I would never, that this was just going to drag out forever for no reason. They were just going to deny my parole and send me back. And so I had doubts. I was just like anybody else. None of that changed, right? But I just depended on His will and His, grace, His mercy to help me through that, and just not try to get too far ahead of myself.
Would you say during some of your hardest times that was your why, just leaning into God every day?
Yeah, my why was because I didn't want to fail. I didn't want to fail, whether that meant I got out or not, right? When I went back, let's say they denied my parole, when I went back, I wanted to be the same guy that I was that got there, and so I didn't want to fail. And failure didn't necessarily mean going home, or not going home, you know what I mean? Failure meant falling on my face, doing something to keep that from happening myself, because that had happened all too often in my life. I probably sabotaged my own success more times than anybody ever has. So.
And that can relate to so many people, because I feel like so many people in different aspects of life are so dependent upon their situation for if they're going to fail or not, when in reality, it really comes down to us. Like, no matter if we got denied of that job, or if in a sporting event we missed a field goal, or whatever happened that happened bad to us, we can let that bring us down. Or you can say, no matter what, I'm going to be the same person. Just like Jason said, when you go to Christ, you can always find that joy that sometimes people in the world are going to say, how do you have that? But then you can turn to verses like John 16 verse 33, which says, in this world you will face troubles of any kind, but take heart, because God has overcame this world.
That's right.
And it has been awesome having you on today, Jason. One last question we want to ask you is, there's going to be, everyone in some aspect of life has messed up where we've made a decision where we're like, why do we do that? Or maybe someone's dealing with a diagnosis where they're like, I don't even know where to go. But what is a message you would have for someone that is stuck in their past and feels like, hey, man, is God really here for me?
So, it kind of goes back to what I said earlier. And so our situation doesn't determine for us our behavior and our actions, right? Like my situation, just because I was living in prison didn't mean I had to continue to act like I lived in prison. I did a lot of things that I tried to live that way for a long time, and live like I didn't want to go home. But I did. Deep down inside, I wanted to go home. And so that's the number one thing is, yes, you might be living in a bad situation, but you can choose, you can make that choice to turn that around, to decide that, you know what, this is the way it is for right now. And start, you start digging. That hole doesn't get 6 feet deep, 10 feet deep with the first time you stick the shovel in the ground. You've got to dig. And sometimes we have to do that. The thing that for me and that I can say is with the Christ in your life, it doesn't feel like it's weighted down, There's times where I still feel like I'm digging, and there's times where I still feel the pressure. Probably more so now that I have a wife and 2 kids than I did when I was in prison, because now they're dependent on me, and so, but it doesn't feel as heavy with Christ in my life.
That's awesome. And we can't thank you enough for being on today with us, Jason. I know so many people that listen to this are going to be able to be impacted in a bigger way than we could ever imagine. And 2 things I thought of as Jason was speaking today is, in life, when we have a relationship with Christ, it's just like we're driving a car. there's a reason that our windshield is bigger than our rearview mirror. Because with Christ, and like Jason said, when we go to Christ every day, no matter what's happened in the past, we can have a peace knowing who holds our future. As it says in Jeremiah 29, verse 11, for God knows the plans he has for us, plans to prosper, not to harm us, plans for hope and a future. And that is no matter your situation, you put your hope in Christ every day, he has a plan and a future for you. And it might not always be what you see, but even when you can't see what's in front of you, call on the one who can see. Thank you guys for tuning in today. And you can catch the Rise Above podcast on any platform you listen to podcasts on, or on social media, or on YouTube. And know that as you go throughout your week, no matter what you face, when you put your hope in Christ, you can always rise above. See you guys next week.